Ancient cities were not built on top of the land, but were woven directly into its fabric. These early architects used the terrain itself as a complex code, a hidden language of slopes, rivers, and stone. We often picture these places as chaotic ruins, but their layouts were as deliberate as modern software. By the end of this journey, you will see the world's oldest cities in a completely new light, understanding the brilliant logic behind their creation. How did they build entire metropolises that could withstand millennia using only the landscape as their guide? And what profound secrets did they understand about our connection to the earth that we have since forgotten? What does it mean to truly build with nature, not against it? Think of a programmer today, typing lines of code to build a complex application. Every command has a purpose, a logical function that contributes to the final, working whole. Ancient city planners operated on a strikingly similar principle. Their code, however, was not written in a digital language, but in the physical grammar of the earth itself. The terrain was their programming language, a set of natural elements with inherent properties and potential. They did not simply adapt to a hill or a river. They actively incorporated these features as critical variables in a grand urban equation. A slope was not an obstacle to be flattened. It was a pre-written line of code for gravity-fed water distribution and waste removal. A towering rock outcrop was not a construction headache. It was a natural fortress module providing defense without a single quarried stone. The predictable path of the sun across the sky was not just a celestial event. It was a built-in algorithm for orienting streets to capture warmth in winter and cooling breezes in summer. This was a system of profound logic, where every choice was deliberate, every placement a response to the land's own instructions. To see these cities as mere collections of buildings is to miss the point entirely. You are looking at a sophisticated program executed in soil and stone, designed to run efficiently for centuries. This principle of terrain as code was perhaps most elegantly expressed in the very lifeblood of any civilization, water. Long before metal pipes and pressure valves, the original plumbing systems were carved not by hand, but by the relentless, predictable force of gravity. The ancient architects were masters of hydrological integration, seeing a gentle slope not as a mere feature of the land, but as a powerful tool waiting to be activated. Consider the great city of Mohenjo-daro in the Indus Valley, a metropolis that thrived over 4,000 years ago. Its remarkably precise grid of streets was far more than a simple layout for traffic. Each street was meticulously engineered to serve a dual purpose. The slight, almost imperceptible gradient of the land was carefully mapped and enhanced, turning the roads themselves into a city-wide network of drainage channels. When the heavy monsoon rains arrived, instead of causing destructive floods, the water was channeled away from homes and public spaces, flowing efficiently through these stone-lined conduits. But the system went far beyond flood control. The planners positioned communal wells at strategic points, ensuring clean water access was never far away, while wastewater from houses was directed into covered drains that ran beneath the streets. This was a closed-loop system where the terrain's natural water flow was the underlying code that dictated the city's entire health and hygiene. The land itself became a dynamic, living utility, transforming the unpredictable deluge of seasonal rains into a controlled, life-sustaining resource. It was a brilliant, sustainable strategy that worked in harmony with nature's own programming, a testament to an engineering philosophy we are only now beginning to fully appreciate. The precision of Mohenjo-daro's water management reveals a deep understanding of terrestrial logic. but the ancient code extended far beyond the earth to the heavens above. For these early architects, the sky was not a distant spectacle but an active blueprint, a celestial map that dictated the very orientation of their world. Before the magnetic compass offered a simple arrow pointing north, the sun and stars provided the only reliable coordinates for navigation and construction. This relationship reached its zenith in places like Teotihuacan, the magnificent city in the Valley of Mexico. There, the sprawling urban plan was not a random arrangement of monumental structures. It was a direct reflection of the cosmos, meticulously programmed into the landscape. The city's main artery, the Street of the Dead, was engineered with astonishing accuracy to align with the setting sun on specific, critical dates of the year. This was not merely symbolic gesture, it was a highly functional piece of urban code. The alignment served as a massive, immovable calendar, marking the solstices and equinoxes with unerring precision. As the sun descended in perfect alignment with the street, it signaled the turning of the seasons, dictating the timing for planting, harvest, and essential religious ceremonies. The pyramids themselves were not just tombs or temples but carefully positioned markers. Their corners and peaks often corresponded with the rising or setting of important stars or planets, weaving astronomical events into the daily rhythm of city life. This integration transformed the entire city into a living observatory. Every citizen, simply by walking the streets, was participating in a grand cosmic cycle. The planners had written a program where the terrain and the heavens worked in concert, embedding a sense of universal order into the very stones beneath their feet. This celestial programming, however, met a very earthly challenge: the constant threat of invasion. Beyond water and astronomy, the terrain held a third, more urgent function as a defensive code. In an age without standing armies or satellite surveillance, a city's survival depended on its ability to see danger coming and withstand an assault. The solution was not to build taller walls from scratch, but to find a landscape that was already a fortress. The planners' logic was brutally efficient. They sought out hilltops, ridges, and steep-sided plateaus, not for the breathtaking views, but for the unparalleled strategic advantage. An elevated position was a natural command center, offering a panoramic view of approaching armies for miles around. More importantly, it transformed the land itself into a weapon against any attacker. The sheer, exhausting climb up a steep slope was the first and most effective layer of defense. An army struggling up a mountainside is slow, disorganized, and utterly vulnerable to rocks, spears, or arrows launched from above. The Acropolis in Athens is a classic example. That iconic rocky outcrop was not chosen by accident. It was a pre-fortified citadel, a naturally defensible stronghold that made the city below immensely difficult to conquer. The same principle is etched into the Andes at Machu Picchu. The Inca architects did not just place a city on a mountain, they integrated the city into the mountain's own defensive grammar. Sheer cliffs acted as impenetrable walls, while a single, narrow ridge controlled access, creating a choke point that a handful of defenders could hold against a legion. This was security written directly into the bedrock. The difficulty of the ascent was not an obstacle to overcome. It was a deliberate, calculated feature of the urban code, a permanent and tireless guardian that required no maintenance and never slept. Machu Picchu is the ultimate expression of terrain as code. Perched on a razor-thin ridge high in the Andes, the city does not conquer the mountain but converses with it. Every structure, from the humblest dwelling to the grandest temple, follows the precise contours of the land as if the stone itself had whispered the blueprint. This was not a fight against nature, but a profound collaboration. The famous agricultural terraces are a perfect example of this integrated logic. They appear as giant green steps carved into the mountainside, but their function was far more sophisticated than simply creating flat farmland. Each terrace was a multi-layered engineering marvel. Beneath the rich soil, layers of gravel and stone acted as a natural drainage system, preventing rainwater from saturating the ground and causing catastrophic landslides. This intricate construction made the steep slopes not only productive but permanently stable, turning a potential liability into the city's sustaining foundation. The terraces also created unique microclimates. The stone walls absorbed heat from the sun during the day and radiated it back slowly through the cool nights, protecting delicate crops from frost and effectively extending the growing season at an altitude where survival was a constant challenge. This was a living system programmed directly into the hillside, where every element served multiple purposes for agriculture, stability, and climate control. The Incas understood that the mountain was not a static platform but a dynamic partner, and they wrote their code to work with its every strength and vulnerability. This deep integration extended to the city's most critical need, water. A natural spring located nearly a kilometer away was channeled into a perfectly engineered stone conduit. The Incas calculated a gentle, consistent gradient that used gravity to bring a fresh, reliable water supply directly into the heart of the citadel. This system fed a series of 16 ceremonial fountains, each one a public water source, demonstrating a mastery of hydraulics that ensured the community's survival. But perhaps the most brilliant piece of code was written to counter the Earth's most violent movements, earthquakes. The Inca builders were master stonemasons, and their technique was a form of seismic programming. Instead of using mortar to lock stones together, they shaped each massive block to fit its neighbors with impossible precision. The walls were built with a slight inward incline, and the stones were cut with subtle angles. When an earthquake struck, the entire structure would dance, the stones shifting and settling without collapsing, then locking back into place once the tremors subsided. This was anti-earthquake code written in granite, a dynamic system that understood and anticipated the land's behavior. Finally, the spiritual dimension of this terrestrial language was made visible in the city's celestial alignments. The Teotihuacan stone, the so-called hitching post of the sun, was precisely carved from the bedrock of the mountain summit. It functioned as an astronomical clock, its angles aligned with the sun's position during the solstices, marking the changing seasons with absolute accuracy. At Machu Picchu, the practical and the sacred were one and the same. A water channel was both a utility and a ritual pathway. A terrace wall was both a farm and a tribute to the mountain's form. The city stands as a complete sentence in the language of the earth, a perfect fusion of engineering and spirituality that has endured for centuries. Yet the rugged mountains and celestial calendars were not the only stage for this ancient logic. Far from the high Andes, on the vast, flat plains of the Indus Valley, a different kind of code was being written. Here, the primary challenge was not elevation but its absence. The land was a featureless expanse, prone to the violent, unpredictable flooding of the great Indus River. To build a city here seemed like a monumental act of defiance against nature itself, but the planners of Mohenjo-daro saw an opportunity hidden within the apparent chaos. Their brilliant innovation was to use the terrain's very flatness as a blank slate for one of history's most sophisticated urban programs. The foundational code was one of elevation. Before a single house was constructed, they raised the entire city on colossal, man-made platforms of mud brick. This was not merely a foundation. It was a deliberate act of reprogramming the landscape, lifting the entire metropolis above the reach of the most destructive floods. The city itself became an island of order in a seasonal sea of mud. Upon this elevated platform, they inscribed a perfect geometric grid of streets, a layout of such precision it rivals modern city planning. But this grid was far more than an exercise in neatness. Each street was engineered with a subtle, calculated gradient. During the monsoon, these streets transformed into a city-wide network of drainage channels, actively directing floodwaters away from homes and public squares. The system was so effective that it included covered brick sewers running beneath the streets, connecting to individual houses. This was a comprehensive sanitary code written directly into the urban fabric. The seemingly passive flatland was actively harnessed to create a constantly flowing system for hygiene and water management. In Mohenjo-daro, the absence of dramatic terrain features was not a limitation. It was a variable that demanded a different kind of solution, proving that even the most challenging landscapes could be programmed for enduring, complex human life. But the rigid geometry of Mohenjo-daro represents only one dialect in this global language of the land. To find its most poetic expression, we must travel to the banks of the Nile. In ancient Egypt, the terrain was not merely functional code, it was sacred scripture. The river was the central, pulsing artery of existence, a divine force that dictated the rhythm of life, death, and eternity itself. The Egyptians saw their world through a profound duality, a binary system as clear as ones and zeros, written directly into the landscape by the path of the sun god Ra. The East Bank, where the sun was born each morning, was the domain of the living. Here, they built their bustling cities and magnificent temples, places of worship designed to catch the first life-giving rays of dawn. The rising sun symbolized creation, renewal, and daily life. But as Ra completed his journey across the sky, his descent in the west held a different meaning. The West Bank, where the sun died each evening, became the realm of the dead. This was where they constructed the vast necropolises, the tombs and pyramids that were not mere graves but machines for resurrection, designed to harness the sun's power for the afterlife. This simple, elegant rule organized the entire Egyptian civilization. A person's entire existence, from their daily prayers to their final resting place, was mapped onto this sacred geography. To live on the wrong side of the river would have been a profound violation of cosmic order. This was a code that infused every aspect of society with spiritual significance, proving that the most powerful programming language is one that speaks not just to practical needs, but to the human soul's deepest beliefs about the universe. While the Egyptians organized their world by the sun's daily path, another civilization wrote its code in direct response to the Earth's violent shudders. On the island of Crete, the Minoans constructed palaces so complex they inspired the myth of the labyrinth. Knossos, with its bewildering maze of corridors, multi-level courtyards, and hundreds of interconnected rooms, seems like architectural chaos. But this apparent disorder was a brilliant and deliberate program written to withstand the island's relentless earthquakes. The Minoan architects were not fighting the unstable terrain, they were collaborating with it. They understood that the ground beneath them was a living, shifting entity, and their building techniques formed a sophisticated anti-seismic language. Their walls were not rigid structures destined to crumble. Instead, they were built with flexibility coded into their very design. They used a technique known as timber framing, where wooden beams were integrated horizontally and vertically within the stone masonry. These beams acted as a shock absorber system, allowing the walls to sway and flex during a tremor without collapsing. The entire layout of the palace was also part of this seismic program. Rooms were arranged in a seemingly irregular pattern around large, open courtyards. This was not a random choice. The arrangement helped to distribute the shockwaves of an earthquake, preventing a single catastrophic point of failure. The courtyards themselves acted as structural buffers, allowing different sections of the palace to move independently. Even the terrain's greatest threat, its instability, was transformed into a functional advantage. This mastery extended underground to a plumbing system that rivaled those of cities millennia later. The Minoans used the natural slope of the land to create a gravity-fed water network. Terracotta pipes, carefully tapered to create a tight seal, channeled fresh spring water from the surrounding hills directly into the palace complex. This same gravitational logic managed waste, with stone conduits efficiently carrying it away. At Knossos, the labyrinth was not a prison for a monster, but a highly engineered solution, a palace programmed to dance with the earthquakes rather than stand rigid against them. This same principle of writing a city into the landscape, of reading the subtle energies of the earth, found perhaps its most formalized expression in ancient China. There, the art of city planning was governed by a sophisticated system known as Feng Shui, which translates literally as wind and water. This was not mere superstition, but a complex code of geomancy, a logical framework for aligning human habitation with the invisible forces believed to flow through the terrain. The goal was absolute harmony, to build in such a way that a city would be nourished by the land's vital energy, or Qi, and protected from its malevolent currents. The ideal site was not left to chance. It was selected according to a precise formula, a blueprint that treated the surrounding landscape as a living, protective entity. To the north, a range of mountains known as the Black Tortoise provided a solid barrier against the cold, harsh winds. This was practical climate control written into the very first rule of the code. To the east and west, lower hills, symbolized by the green dragon and the white tiger, embraced the site, offering lateral protection and creating a sense of enclosed, nurtured space. Finally, to the south, the land was to open up to a river or a vast plain, represented by the vermilion bird. This orientation ensured the settlement would receive ample sunlight and have direct access to the life-giving resource of water. This was a complete environmental system where every cardinal direction had a specific terrestrial function, blending defense, agriculture, and spiritual well-being into a single, coherent plan. Centuries later, the magnificent Forbidden City in Beijing stands as a powerful testament to the enduring power of this ancient terrain code. While built on the flat plains of the capital, its designers went to extraordinary lengths to recreate this sacred geography artificially. A man-made hill was constructed to the north, embodying the protective Black Tortoise. The Golden River was channeled through the southern courts, representing the vermilion bird. The entire complex was meticulously aligned along a north-south axis, ensuring the optimal flow of energy. The Forbidden City is not just a palace, it is a later, monumental chapter in the same story, proving that when the perfect natural terrain was not available, these master planners would simply rewrite the land's code to match their celestial blueprint. Yet even the man-made mountains of Mesopotamia could not escape the ultimate terrestrial variable, the very ground they were built upon. The same river silt that provided the clay for every brick also created a landscape with a profound and hidden instability. Beneath the flat plains, the water table rose and fell, and the soft earth settled in unpredictable ways. To build something eternal on such a shifting foundation required another layer of ingenious code. The Mesopotamian architects developed a solution that was both simple and brilliant, a form of structural programming to outsmart the unstable soil. They did not fight the sinking earth, but instead designed their ziggurats and temples to sink evenly. The core of these massive structures was not built from solid brick, which would crack under uneven pressure. Instead, they filled the interior with a loose rubble of broken bricks, pottery shards, and gravel. This aggregate core acted as a flexible cushion, allowing the entire monumental building to settle as a single, unified mass. If one corner began to sink faster than another, the rubble inside would shift and redistribute the weight, preventing catastrophic cracks from forming in the sacred walls above. This was a dynamic system designed for a dynamic landscape. The builders were writing code that anticipated change, creating structures that could gracefully accept their own slow descent into the earth from which they came. It was a humble acknowledgement that even the most ambitious human plans are subject to the land's silent, shifting rules. But how does one begin to write a city into a mountainside or align a temple with a distant star? The master planners of the ancient world did not have satellites, GPS, or laser levels. Their most advanced technology was a profound and patient observation of the world around them. They were master readers of the land, and their tools were deceptively simple extensions of their own senses. Consider the gnomon, perhaps the oldest and most powerful surveying instrument ever devised. It was nothing more than a vertical rod stuck into the ground, yet by meticulously tracking the moving shadow it cast throughout the day and across the seasons, these early scientists could map the precise path of the sun. They could determine true north and south, chart the solstices, and lay out the cardinal directions with astonishing accuracy. This single, simple stick was their celestial compass, allowing them to program cosmic alignments into their stone monuments. For measuring the earth itself, they turned to water. A water level, essentially a trough of water, reveals a perfectly horizontal plane regardless of the terrain's unevenness. By using this principle, they could determine incredibly subtle gradients across vast distances, ensuring their aqueducts and drainage channels would flow with just the right amount of force. The Romans perfected this art with the groma, a clever device that used plumb bobs suspended from a cross to sight perfectly straight lines and right angles across the landscape. With it, they could plot the relentless, arrow-straight roads that stitched their empire together. These were not crude methods. They were elegant solutions born of a deep understanding of physics and geometry. The real genius lay not in the complexity of the tools, but in the skill of the people using them. It was a process that required immense patience and a symbiotic relationship with the environment. A surveyor would have to sit for hours, days, even entire seasons, simply watching and recording. They learned to read the whispers of the wind, the flow of water, and the angle of light. This intimate knowledge allowed them to translate the complex, living language of the terrain into a blueprint for a civilization. It was a testament to human intelligence, proving that the most powerful code is not always written in machines, but in a mindful conversation with the world. These hidden networks were the true backbone of civilization, the silent code running beneath the grand monuments. While temples and palaces captured the glory, it was the invisible infrastructure that guaranteed survival. The most brilliant example of this hidden logic is the Qanat system, an ancient Persian invention so effective it is still in use today. Imagine a gently sloping desert hillside. Persian engineers would dig a mother well deep into the ground, far upslope, until they tapped into a hidden aquifer. Then, with astonishing precision, they would begin carving a nearly horizontal tunnel back towards the surface, following the natural gradient of the land. This tunnel, just large enough for a person to crawl through, would stretch for miles with vertical access shafts dug at regular intervals for construction and maintenance. The genius was in its passive operation. The entire system was powered by gravity alone. Water from the aquifer would seep into the tunnel's head and then flow steadily downhill, emerging miles away at the surface as a reliable, freshwater spring in the middle of an arid plain. This was not just a water pipe, it was a complete terrestrial program. The Qanat did not deplete the aquifer, it gently harvested it. Because the water traveled underground, it was protected from evaporation under the desert sun, a critical feature for sustaining agriculture and cities in one of the harshest climates on Earth. The Qanat transformed the landscape itself into a massive, living utility, turning barren land into fertile oases and enabling empires to rise. It was back-end code of the highest order, a masterpiece of hydrological engineering that worked in perfect harmony with the terrain's deepest secrets. The same principle of invisible functionality powered the Roman world. Beneath the bustling forums and cobbled streets of every major Roman city lay another hidden marvel, the Cloaca Maxima, or Great Sewer. This was not merely a ditch for waste, it was a comprehensive subterranean network, a circulatory system for urban health. Roman engineers used the natural slope of the land with the same mastery as the Persians. They constructed these stone-lined channels with a precise, consistent gradient that used gravity to constantly flush water and waste out of the city and into a nearby river. Public latrines, bathhouses, and even private residences were connected to this network, a level of public sanitation that would not be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. These systems were so well built that many remain functional to this day. This underground world was the essential counterpart to the glorious city above. The magnificent aqueducts that brought fresh water in were only half of the equation. The cloaca that carried waste out completed the cycle, creating a dynamic flow that prevented disease and supported dense populations. The forum was the user interface, the place of politics, commerce, and social life, but the resilience of the entire system, its ability to function day after day, century after century, depended entirely on this unseen, terrain-exploiting back-end code. It proves that the most enduring cities were not just collections of beautiful buildings, but deeply integrated organic systems, where the visible and the invisible worked as one. The very stones chosen for these cities were not arbitrary selections. They were the next logical line in the terrain's code, a deliberate use of materials that spoke the local landscape's native tongue. Ancient builders understood that the most resilient and harmonious structures were those crafted from the earth directly beneath their feet. This was a philosophy of deep integration, where the quarry and the construction site were often one and the same. In Greece, the brilliant white marble of Mount Pentelicus was not merely a beautiful facade. It was a fundamental component of the regional logic. The stone was incredibly strong, capable of supporting the vast spans and elegant columns of temples like the Parthenon, yet soft enough to be carved with exquisite detail when first quarried, hardening upon exposure to air. Its dazzling whiteness also served a practical purpose, reflecting the intense Mediterranean sun and helping to keep the sacred spaces within cooler. This was not an imported luxury, it was a hyper-local solution, turning the mountain itself into the city's skeleton and skin. Far across the world, the Anasazi people of the American Southwest demonstrated an even more intimate dialogue with their material. They built their breathtaking cliff dwellings like those at Mesa Verde directly into the towering sandstone alcoves. They did not fight the rock but followed its contours, using natural recesses as ready-made rooms and shelters. The sandstone itself acted as a natural insulator, absorbing the desert's heat during the day and slowly releasing it through the cold nights, creating a stable, comfortable interior climate without any need for mechanical systems. The color of their buildings blended seamlessly with the canyon walls, making the settlements appear as natural growths from the cliff face itself. This practice achieved a profound harmony. It eliminated the immense energy and labor required to transport foreign materials over long distances. More importantly, it ensured the architecture felt inherently, inevitably part of the place, as if the city had organically emerged from the land rather than being imposed upon it. The choice of local stone was the final step in writing a city into the terrain, a declaration that the building and the mountain were ultimately one entity. This cultural code transformed geography into a living narrative. For the ancient Maya, the landscape pulsed with spiritual energy. A cave was not merely a hollow in the rock, it was a sacred portal, an entrance to the underworld known as Xibalba. The location of a city was therefore never an accident of geography. A major urban center like Copan was deliberately founded near such a cave, weaving this gateway to the gods directly into the urban fabric. The city's plazas and pyramids were arranged to create a physical and symbolic connection to this spiritual axis mundi, this center of the world. The very ground the city stood upon was holy, making every ritual performed their part of a conversation with the divine. This was a profound fusion of the practical and the sacred, where the city's plan was a map of the Maya cosmos itself. Across the world, the Greeks inscribed a different kind of story into their terrain. The placement of a temple was a deliberate act of cultural programming, connecting the human community to the myths that defined them. A temple would be meticulously oriented not just to the cardinal directions, but towards a specific, distant mountain peak, a sacred grove of trees, or the site of a legendary event. This created an invisible but powerful line of sight, a visual tether linking the daily life of the city to its mythological past. Worshippers approaching the temple were not just walking towards a building, they were journeying along a path defined by story, their gaze directed to a landscape feature that held deep meaning. The city became a stage where mythology was constantly reinforced by the very act of moving through its spaces. This layer of cultural coding reveals that the invisible plans of early cities were as much about shaping a shared identity as they were about managing water or ensuring defense. The terrain provided a physical vocabulary for expressing a civilization's deepest beliefs about creation, the gods, and humanity's place in the universe. By programming their cities with these cultural values, ancient planners ensured that every citizen, simply by living within its walls, would absorb and participate in a collective worldview. The city itself became a teacher, its streets and structures silently reinforcing the codes of culture and faith with every passing day. This Roman grid system was a language of empire, spoken from the sun-baked hills of Spain to the misty frontiers of Britain. At its heart were two simple, powerful lines, the Cardo running north-south and the Decumanus running east-west. Where they crossed, at the very center of the new settlement, stood the Forum, the bustling heart of commerce, politics, and social life. This was the core program, a repeatable module for instant civilization. Yet the true genius of Roman planning was not this rigid template, but its remarkable flexibility. The system was designed to be compiled or interpreted on any terrain it encountered. When a Roman surveyor arrived at a new site, his first task was not to impose a perfect square onto the landscape, but to read it. In a wide, flat river valley, the grid could be laid out with geometric perfection, its streets forming flawless right angles. But when the land was rugged and hilly, the code adapted. The planners would identify the most practical natural corridor, often a river valley or a gently sloping pass between hills, and assign that route to the Cardo Maximus, the main north-south artery. This primary street would follow the land's own logic, curving gently to maintain a manageable grade for carts and soldiers. The cross streets, the decumani, would then be plotted relative to this central spine, creating a grid that was slightly warped, but perfectly optimized for the actual ground it occupied. This was not a failure of the system, it was its highest function, a brilliant balance between human order and topographical reality. The Romans understood that the most efficient code is one that listens to its environment, proving that true mastery lies not in dominating the land, but in collaborating with its inherent wisdom. That elegant Roman balance between grid and gradient would not last. A new power was emerging, one that promised liberation from the land's ancient constraints. The Industrial Revolution armed humanity with steam engines and dynamite, tools of such immense force that they seemed to render the subtle language of the terrain obsolete. Why patiently follow a river's meander when a canal could be blasted straight through rock? Why design a city around a hill when the hill itself could be carted away, bucket by bucket? This was a monumental shift in philosophy, from reading the Earth's existing code to overwriting it with a new, human-centered script. The primary variable was no longer the land's natural logic, but the relentless efficiency of the machine. The result was a new kind of urban landscape, one of stark geometric order imposed upon the living world. Cities were laid out in perfect right angles, their streets numbered rather than named for the features they replaced. This new code was simple, scalable, and brutally effective for the rapid expansion of commerce and industry, but it came at a profound cost. The intricate, multi-layered systems that ancient planners built over generations were paved over. The gentle slopes that guided water were flattened, the natural drainage basins were filled in, and the wind channels that cooled summer afternoons were blocked by monolithic buildings. We gained a powerful, universal language for building, but we began to lose our fluency in the local dialects of the earth, the very literacy that allowed civilizations to thrive sustainably for millennia. We traded a deep, responsive conversation with the environment for a one-sided declaration of control. Our modern cities, with their concrete and steel, represent a triumphant break from the constraints of the natural world. Yet this very freedom has created a cascade of new vulnerabilities. As we face rising temperatures, devastating floods, and dwindling resources, the ancient logic of building with the land is re-emerging as a critical survival skill. This is not a romantic return to the past, but a pragmatic rediscovery of principles that modern engineering is only now beginning to formalize. The ancient language of the terrain is being translated into 21st century terms, with names like green infrastructure and sponge cities. The core idea remains unchanged: to see the urban landscape not as a barrier to be conquered, but as a partner in creating resilience. Permaculture, for instance, is a modern design philosophy that directly mirrors the Incan understanding of integrated systems. It teaches us to observe the natural flows of a site, the path of water, the angle of the sun, the direction of the wind, and then design human habitats that work with those energies. Instead of channeling rainwater into pipes and dumping it into rivers as quickly as possible, a permaculture approach would seek to slow it down, spread it across the land, and let it sink into the soil. This is precisely what the agricultural terraces of Machu Picchu achieved on a grand scale, creating stability and fertility from the flow of water down a mountain. Today, this principle is being applied in urban parks, green roofs, and rain gardens, which act like miniature terraces, absorbing stormwater, reducing flood risk, and recharging groundwater supplies. The most ambitious modern application of this ancient code is the concept of the sponge city. Pioneered in China, this approach treats the entire urban area as a living system designed to absorb and utilize rainwater, much like a sponge. Instead of relying solely on gray infrastructure like concrete culverts and pumping stations, sponge cities incorporate permeable pavements, constructed wetlands, and interconnected green spaces. These features mimic the natural water retention capacity of forested land, which the original settlers of a region would have inherently understood. It is a direct echo of Mohenjo-daro's city-wide drainage program, but updated for the age of megacities. The goal is to let the city breathe and drink, turning a problem, stormwater, into a resource. This is not about abandoning technology, but about layering smart, nature-based solutions on top of it. It is the difference between fighting a river and inviting it into the city's design. The Dutch, masters of living with water, have moved from building ever higher dikes to a strategy of room for the river, creating floodplains and parks that can safely inundate during extreme weather. This is a profound shift in mindset from defense to dialogue. It acknowledges that the terrain's power cannot be permanently suppressed, only respectfully managed. The ancient planners would have recognized this wisdom immediately, for it was the same logic that placed their cities on elevated platforms or designed them to dance with earthquakes. The lesson for our future is clear. The most sustainable and resilient cities will not be those with the most advanced technology fighting against nature, but those that have learned to code their growth using the land's own native language. They will harness the slope of a hill for natural ventilation, use urban forests to cool microclimates, and design watersheds that function as public amenities. This ancient wisdom offers a blueprint for a future where our cities are not separate from the environment, but a harmonious and regenerative part of it. The original masters of ecological design left behind a powerful legacy, not in ruins, but in a way of seeing, a code waiting to be reread and rewritten for the challenges of our time. Petra's rose-red cliffs stand as the ultimate testament to a civilization that did not construct its city, but revealed it. The Nabatean architects approached the rugged Jordanian desert not as a blank slate, but as a complex program already written in the grain of the sandstone. Their masterpiece was not built upon the land, it was sculpted from its very essence. The city's entire logic was governed by the Sikh, a magnificent natural gorge slicing through the mountains. This was not merely a road into the city, it was its primary line of code. The Sikh functioned as a secret, defensible gateway, its narrow, winding path forcing any potential invader into a vulnerable, single-file line. But its genius was hydrological. During the rare but violent desert flash floods, the Sikh transformed from a corridor into a controlled aqueduct. The Nabateans engineered a series of dams and diversion tunnels within the canyon walls, masterfully channeling the destructive torrents away from the city center and into massive catchment basins. They understood that in a desert, water is the most valuable currency, and they wrote their entire urban plan around capturing every single drop. Across the entire site, they carved an intricate network of channels and terracotta pipes into the rock, directing rainwater from every conceivable surface into a vast system of underground cisterns. This system was so efficient it could support a population of thousands in one of the most arid regions on Earth. The very facades of Petra's most famous structures, like the Treasury, are not just decorative. Their intricate carvings and channels also serve to divert rainwater, ensuring that even the walls themselves contributed to the city's survival. The Nabateans saw potential where others saw only barren rock. They read the desert's harsh language and wrote a brilliant response directly into the stone, creating an oasis of breathtaking beauty from a landscape that had every reason to remain silent. The caracol at Chichen Itza resembles a modern observatory more than a classic Mayan pyramid. Its distinctive circular tower, perched atop a broad rectangular platform, stands out against the jungle skyline not as a temple to the gods, but as a machine for reading the heavens. This structure was a masterpiece of architectural coding, where every curve and opening served a precise celestial function. The narrow, tube-like windows slicing through its thick walls were not placed at random. Each one was a precisely calibrated sightline, a permanent astronomical instrument carved in stone. One window famously frames the extreme northern setting of Venus, while another captures its southernmost point on the horizon. The entire building was an analog computer, its mechanisms forged from rock and shadow, designed to track the complex cycles of the planet, the Maya associated with war and rain. The precision did not stop at the building's edge. The terrain surrounding the caracol was actively programmed to support its function. The Maya engineers would have cleared vegetation and perhaps even leveled or sculpted the land to create a perfectly clean sightline to the horizon. Any tree or mound that obstructed the view of Venus's dramatic rise or set would have been removed, ensuring the celestial events could be observed with absolute clarity. This integration of architecture and earth created a unified observational device, a permanent fixture in the urban landscape that turned the entire city into a participant in a cosmic cycle. The alignment was both science and scripture. Predicting the appearance of Venus was not merely an academic exercise. It was essential for scheduling rituals, planning agricultural cycles, and even timing military campaigns. The building itself was a form of frozen knowledge, a terrestrial code that allowed the Maya to synchronize their society with the clockwork of the universe, proving that the highest form of urban planning was to write the laws of the sky directly into the stones of the city. These ancient trade routes were the internet of their day, a sprawling web of information and goods flowing along paths dictated by the earth itself. Think of them not as simple dirt tracks, but as living algorithms, constantly refined by the footsteps of countless merchants and travelers. Their logic was ruthlessly efficient, seeking the path of least resistance not out of laziness, but out of a deep understanding of survival. A caravan could not simply bulldoze its way through a mountain range. Instead, it sought out the secret whispers of the land, the gentle passes and navigable valleys that offered a way through. River valleys were the superhighways of the ancient world, providing flat, stable ground for travel and a constant, guiding source of fresh water. A mountain pass, even a high and difficult one, was a calculated compromise, a node in the code that traded a steep climb for the immense strategic advantage of connecting two fertile regions. These routes actively avoided the land's dead ends and dangers, steering clear of impenetrable swamps and shifting sand dunes. The genius of this system was its emergent intelligence. No single king or cartographer designed the entire Silk Road or the Incan Road system. These networks grew organically over centuries, as each generation of travelers confirmed the best path, adding their own small corrections to the collective map. The terrain itself was the ultimate arbiter, rewarding efficient routes with prosperity and punishing inefficient ones with obscurity. This constant collective analysis of the landscape created a perfectly optimized network, a global code written not in stone, but in the very patterns of human movement. And at the most critical points along these algorithms, where paths converged or a natural obstacle could be crossed, cities would inevitably rise. A shallow point in a river became a natural ford, and then a trading post, and then a bustling town. The intersection of a coastal route and an inland valley became a market of immense importance. The city was not just a destination, it was a function within the larger program, a processing center for the resources and ideas flowing along these terrestrial circuits. Walking through the ruins of an ancient city, you often feel an unexpected sense of calm. This is not just the quiet of abandonment, it is the lingering echo of a design that speaks directly to our deepest instincts. A city woven into its terrain provides a subconscious map, a way of understanding your place in the world without needing a single street sign. Natural landmarks, a distinctive hill, a bend in the river, or even the path of the sun become constant reference points. Your mind effortlessly builds a mental model of the city, not based on abstract names and numbers, but on the permanent features of the landscape itself. This intuitive wayfinding eliminates the subtle anxiety of being lost, replacing it with a quiet confidence. You are not just in the city, you are of it, your movements guided by the same logic that shaped its foundations. This connection extends to the very light and air you breathe. Imagine standing in a courtyard in ancient Petra, precisely oriented to capture the low winter sun. The warmth that fills the space is not an accident, it is a daily gift from the architects who coded the sun's path into the city's plan. That specific quality of light, the way it defines shadow and highlights stone, creates a profound sensory comfort. It is a feeling of being cared for by the environment, a subtle affirmation that you are in a place designed for human habitation. This goes beyond mere aesthetics. It taps into a primal need for orientation and predictability. There is also an inherent sense of security hardwired into these locations. The elevated Acropolis in Athens was not just a fortress for soldiers, it was a psychological anchor for every citizen below. Simply knowing the defensible high ground was there, a visible symbol of protection, provided a collective sense of safety that permeated daily life. The city's layout itself was a form of reassurance, its narrow, winding streets in some cultures creating defensible choke points, while its open plazas in others offered clear sightlines and community gathering spaces. This careful balance between prospect and refuge, between open views and sheltered areas, is a pattern deeply embedded in our psyche. We are drawn to places that allow us to see without being seen, to feel connected yet protected. Ancient planners understood this instinctively, using the terrain's natural contours to create these conditions without force. Living in such an environment fosters a fundamental sense of belonging. When a city respects the land, it reinforces our own connection to the natural world. The daily rhythm is not a fight against the elements, but a dance with them. You feel the cool breeze channeled through a cleverly aligned street. You witness the sunset framed by a temple doorway aligned for that very purpose. These are not grand events, but small, constant reminders that you are part of a larger, orderly system. This is the true power of the terrain's code. It designs not just for the body, but for the human spirit, creating places that feel inherently right because they were built to nurture us. Plans for these cities were never locked away in filing cabinets. They existed as a living memory, passed from one generation to the next through the most resilient data storage system ever devised, the human mind. Without paper blueprints or digital files, the intricate codes of terrain and alignment were preserved through a rich tapestry of oral tradition, ritual, and hands-on apprenticeship. This was not a simple recitation of facts, but the careful transmission of an entire worldview. The knowledge of a sacred spring's location, the precise angle for a solstice alignment, or the secret to mixing a specific mortar was embedded within stories, songs, and repeated ceremonial practices. A song about a river god was not just a myth, it was a mnemonic device encoding the river's seasonal flooding patterns. A ritual dance performed at the winter solstice physically reinforced the critical alignment of the main temple. The master builder did not hand an apprentice a set of instructions. Instead, he took the young learner out into the landscape, teaching them how to truly see the land, to feel the subtle drainage of a slope with their feet, to identify the best quarry stone by its sound when struck. This knowledge was the living software that updated itself with each generation, adapting to slight changes while holding fast to core principles. It was an intangible cultural heritage, constantly practiced and perfected, ensuring that the city's invisible plan continued to function flawlessly, century after century. This living memory, passed from master to apprentice, was the original compiler for the terrain's code. Today, we have a new set of tools to read that ancient language, technologies that act like a debugger for the planet, revealing programs hidden for millennia. Light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, is perhaps the most revolutionary. Mounted on aircraft, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground, where a human eye sees only an impenetrable blanket of jungle canopy. These lasers penetrate the leaves, bouncing off the solid earth below. The result is a breathtakingly precise three-dimensional map of the ground surface, digitally stripping away the forest to reveal what lies beneath. In the jungles of Guatemala and Belize, LiDAR has performed a kind of archaeological magic, uncovering the true scale of ancient Maya civilization. What were once thought to be isolated ceremonial centers are now revealed as vast, interconnected urban grids, with raised highways, intricate irrigation canals, and thousands of previously unknown structures. The laser maps show us that the Maya did not simply dot the landscape with temples. They engineered it on a colossal scale, turning entire watersheds into managed agricultural systems. It is like seeing the full source code of a civilization for the very first time. But what about the secrets buried deep underground? For that, archaeologists use ground-penetrating radar. This device sends radio waves into the Earth, which bounce back when they hit a change in density, like a buried wall or a hollow chamber. It allows researchers to map the subterranean world without ever lifting a shovel. They can trace the ghostly outlines of foundations, locate forgotten tombs, and follow the intricate paths of ancient water channels, like the Qanat systems of Persia, hidden beneath the sand for centuries. Meanwhile, high above, satellites provide another perspective. By analyzing subtle variations in light and heat, they can detect patterns invisible to the naked eye. Differences in soil moisture might reveal the location of long filled in moats or irrigation ditches. Slight depressions in a field can trace the route of a Roman road, its stone foundation still compacting the earth below 2,000 years later. Together, these tools are allowing us to reconstruct the sophisticated logic of the first city planners. We are no longer just guessing at their intentions. We are reading the original blueprints they wrote into the land itself, uncovering a forgotten wisdom about how to build in harmony with our world. Yet this profound legacy now faces a silent, accelerating threat. The very terrain these ancient planners so carefully coded is being rewritten by the demands of our modern world. A new highway designed for efficiency can slice through a 1,000-year-old hydrological system, severing the invisible channels that sustained a civilization. A sprawling dam project might create vital energy, but in doing so, it can drown an entire valley, submerging not just ruins but the precise geographical logic that made their location brilliant. The destruction is not merely of stone and mortar, it is of context. To lose the subtle slope that guided a city's water is to lose the key to understanding its entire design. This creates an urgent ethical imperative, a responsibility to conduct deep archaeological and geological surveys before the first bulldozer arrives. It is not enough to simply excavate artifacts. We must map the land's ancient programming, preserving the full story written in its contours. This same care must extend to the millions of feet that now walk these sacred grounds. Unsustainable tourism, with paths eroded by countless visitors, can permanently alter the microterrain, disrupting the very drainage patterns and sightlines the architects engineered. The challenge is to find a balance to allow people to experience this wonder while protecting the fragile landscape that holds its meaning. We must learn to be readers of this ancient code, not erasers of it. The wisdom embedded in these places offers invaluable lessons for our own future, but only if we choose to listen to the land before we speak over it. The silent stones of Petra and the celestial towers of Chichen, Itza whisper a final, unifying truth. These were not cities imposed upon the earth, but conversations with it. The invisible plans of early civilizations reveal a profound and continuous dialogue between humanity and the living world. They understood the land not as a passive blank slate to be conquered, but as an active partner in creation, a landscape already brimming with intelligence and potential. Their terrain as code approach was a philosophy of deep integration, resulting in urban environments that were inherently resilient, remarkably sustainable, and imbued with profound meaning. They built with the mountain, not against it. They listened to the river and learned its logic. For them, the sun and stars were not distant lights, but essential components of the blueprint. As we now face the mounting environmental challenges of the 21st century, from rising seas to extreme weather, perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from these ancient masters is to quiet our own engines and listen once more to the language of the land. Their legacy is not just in the ruins we admire, but in a way of thinking, a code for building a future where our cities are not separate from nature, but a harmonious and regenerative part of it. What other secrets does the Earth hold for building a better, more resilient world? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this journey into the past, subscribe for more explorations into history's greatest mysteries.